have Darren live with us. Awesome.
There we go.
Oh, I have to be honest, Darren. I was just panicking the last few minutes. I'm like, how do we get him in live? It should just pop up. Amazing. Good morning, my friend. How's it going? I think you're in Singapore, right?
I am. I'm in Singapore. Good morning to you and good evening to those in other time zones.
Awesome. So what are we doing today? We are talking about taxes for digital nomads. So basically, we're going to be having a free and live question and answer session with my friend Darren here, who is a tax expert for digital nomads. So for anybody watching, the big benefit that we're hoping to share with you guys today is basically to kind of sort fact from fiction, because when it comes to figuring out the best tax solution for yourself as a digital nomad, there's a lot of people talking about what they're doing, what they think you should be doing, but not as many people talking about it who actually have professional experience. So my hope is that Darren can help sort that out with us today. So just a quick intro about Darren and why he's actually qualified to help us with this stuff. So he's a partner at Hayden T. Joseph & Co., and they have offices in the US, UK, and Singapore. He is also a member of the international tax team at Moores Rowland Asia Pacific. Darren is an enrolled agent who has been admitted to practice before the IRS and is an associate member of the American Institute of CPAs. He has 2 master's degrees in economics and has completed the advanced tax course work at both New York University and the University of London. This is a mouthful, Darren. You've got a lot of accreditations. He also has been published in places like Forbes Asia, the American Chamber of Commerce, and there's more stuff here, but basically he is a badass tax expert, and he is going to support us. So for anyone who doesn't know who I am, I'm just Robert O'Crook. I'm the founder of the Digital Nomads Forum, and I'm all about supporting remote workers and digital nomads all around the world. So let's jump into things. So Darren, we're going to be talking about taxes today, and I just wanted to start by kind of highlighting the difference between what's considered legal and ethical. So I'll just quickly share what that means to me, and then let me know if you're on the same page. So when it comes to what's legal for taxes as a digital nomad, we're basically talking about being completely legal, following the laws in the countries that we belong to or in the countries that we're visiting that we're existing in, versus ethical, which is maybe more about, you know, is it fair that I have to pay so many taxes? Should I pay these taxes even though it's a law? They're kind of separate things, right?
Absolutely. So again, thank you for allowing me to join your session today. I deeply appreciate it. Just a quick, before we jump into that important question that you posed, I just want to comment that while I am a tax consultant, I am not your tax consultant. What that means is that we're just having a general conversation about general principles, and I'm hoping that at the end of the process that you would you as a listener to this live stream would know the kind of questions that you need to ask yourself and ask whoever your preferred counsel is. So it points you in the right direction rather than giving you concrete answers. Now, switching back to the question that you posed just now, I think, I agree with that classification. There's the ethical, and there is, which is of course quite subjective. And there's what we call tax avoidance and what we call tax evasion. Let's start with the ethics. In terms of the ethics, well, that's a space that obviously people want to engage us in a lot, but that's something I tend to avoid. Everyone has an opinion as to whether, and it gets into politics, and there's never an easy answer with politics. People think they pay too much well, few people think they pay too little tax, but it does happen. So it's a conversation around, well, I don't live there permanently, I'm just passing through, or I no longer reside there. Why is Canada, Australia, the UK, the US still wanting to tax me? That's an ethical discussion, and that you need to take that up with your elected representatives. In terms of the other two classifications, tax avoidance and tax evasion, we can have a more substantive conversation around that.
Awesome.
Tax avoidance is when it's legal. So, for example, if you are an American citizen or green card holder and you want to take advantage of the foreign earned income exclusion or the housing deduction, that's perfectly legit. And that comes under tax planning or tax avoidance. No problem with that. The problem that we do have would be tax evasion, which is completely legal, and that is a burgeoning industry. Unfortunately, there are quite a number of people that always know a hack or a shortcut, or they heard such and such, and those are the ones that get you in trouble. When I was in Bali, end of last month, I think. I was at a bar and I had a conversation with this guy who, he had US tax issues and he was represented by an attorney. And the attorney appeared to be what he appeared to be. But at the end of the process, the IRS was going forward with criminal and civil charges against him. So, which means that whoever his representative was couldn't do what he or she claimed to be able to do. And
Okay.
unfortunately, that is a common narrative that people promise shortcuts, they promise miracles. Basically, the age of hiding is over. Transparency is what it's all about. So the conversation really needs to be steered from evasion, i.e., paying taxes nowhere, which is near impossible, to tax avoidance or proper tax planning.
Okay.
So I just wanted to state that up front so those who logged in with the intent of hearing, okay, how can I hear how to pay taxes like nowhere? You can probably click off now because you're not going to get that. If you want to hear a legal discussion around the opportunities that are available for tax planning, that's something we could engage in.
Awesome. And just to make that clear for everyone, uh, yeah, we're not looking to not pay any taxes and get away with everything. We're just looking to maximize, or I guess minimize, what we can legally pay on taxes. So for everyone who's already tuned in live, go ahead and pop in whatever questions you have about tax for digital nomads and remote workers in there, and we'll start going through them. While we're waiting for some people to share their questions, Darren, I have some that people who weren't able to join us live sent to me to ask you. So let's jump into it. One of the first questions, which I thought was a great place to start, is what do you feel are some of the biggest mistakes that you currently see digital nomads making when it comes to taxes that they might not be aware of?
Hmm. The biggest mistake. So the thing is that I would divide potential nomads or people who classify themselves as location independent into two categories. There are those that are US exposed and those that are not US exposed.
Okay.
So for those who are US exposed, I think the biggest mistake is thinking that, hey, I'm no longer in the
One
US.
question,
Sure.
Darren. For anyone who's
Yeah.
watching, what's the difference between what does US exposed mean exactly?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, and thanks for calling me out on that.
No
So
problem.
a US exposed person would be someone who's a US citizen.
Okay.
So they have a passport, they're a
Okay.
green card holder. They may be what we call an accidental American. So like the former foreign secretary in the UK, Boris Johnson, he was born in New York, but he left as a toddler. And he may or may not have had a US passport. It doesn't matter. Once you were born in US soil, you are a US citizen. That's just the way it is.
Okay.
So, or you may have been born out here in Bali or in, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and one of your parents is American. That could bring you into the tax net as well. Or you may hit substantial presence. You've been in and out of the U.S. and it crosses a certain number of days. So basically, birth, passport, green card, or spending lots of time in the U.S. I think those are the four categories.
Okay. So that makes you US tax exposed. Okay. And then
Yes, right. So there's that category and those who are not. For those who are
okay.
U.S. tax exposed, the biggest mistake to answer your question would be believing that because they're not in US soil, they have no responsibilities to the Internal Revenue Service. The
Okay.
answer is that's so wrong, you do. And even though, and then the other misconception around that is, well, I make less than 100 grand, so therefore there's nothing for me to do. Again, you're wrong. The point is, once you make any money and you have bank accounts outside of the US, you have businesses outside the US, you have a responsibility to let the IRS know. There may be no payments needed, but you do have a responsibility to be compliant with the reporting side of things.
Okay.
For those who are not US persons, again, the biggest mistake is thinking, hey, I no longer reside in Canada, Australia, UK, insert your country there. Therefore, I have no obligations to anyone, anywhere, whoopee. That typically comes back to bite you in the end, because the
Yeah.
way the world works right now is that it's no longer acceptable not to be taxed anywhere. And the question, at some point in time, someone is going to ask you, where have you been paying taxes? And
Yeah.
if you can't answer that question, you're going to have problems when
Yeah.
whether it is when you eventually return to Canada or Australia or Italy or whatever. Someone at some point is going to ask you questions, and it's going to give you no end of hurt if
So
you don't
actually,
resolve that upfront.
what I'm kind of hearing even is, so
Mhm.
potentially, like, I'm a Canadian citizen, but maybe I'm just traveling for fun into another country. And if I
Mhm.
had no residency, citizenship, basically tax responsibilities anywhere, if I told the border that of the country I was going into, they might actually give me a hard time at the border, even if that's totally true. Is that kind of accurate?
Not at the border, but
Okay.
The Canadian Tax Authority would at some point. Well, with Canada,
Okay.
it's special. You need to register and let the Canadian Tax Authority know, hey, I'm no longer resident in Canada for tax purposes.
Okay.
So there's that element. Then if you didn't do that, they will be sending you letters at your last known address to ask, hey, what's up? Where's your
Yep.
tax return? Aren't you working? What's your situation? But
Okay.
even if you avoid that, at some point in time, you may wish to return to Canada.
Okay.
And if you were not working at all where you were traveling to, maybe that's fine. But if you were earning an income and that money is going to be brought back into Canada, for example, the Canadian banks, the Canadian Tax Authority will want to ask, okay, well, thanks for this, but where did it come from? Prove that it's legit.
Sure.
And you prove that it's legit by showing me some document that says you pay tax on it somewhere.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's a problem.
So
Yeah.
I met you maybe a couple weeks or months ago in here in Bali, and you came to do a similar
Yeah.
talk. And one of the things that you shared that kind of blew my mind a bit was that when you're traveling, even by just staying in many countries around the world for 6 months or longer, you actually
Mhm.
become responsible for paying some taxes legally. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I bet a lot of people who are
Mhm.
watching are traveling all
Mhm.
over the place, and they might be staying in places for extended periods of time and think that there's no tax responsibilities because there's no paperwork, nobody asks them anything. Could you
Mhm.
talk about that a little bit?
Right. So for most jurisdictions, uh, you can trigger tax residency by just spending a lot of time on their soil.
Okay. Just
Now,
visiting as a
there's a
tourist.
difference. Normally, it's 183 days, but some countries calculate it differently. So the US, they have a look back period where they look back not just the present year, but they look back 3 years. It's a 3 year look back. But bottom line is there's a certain number of days. And
Okay.
in Indonesia, it's the default, which is 183 or 6 months.
Okay.
So once you spend more than that certain number of days, in this case, Indonesia will be 6 months on the within a calendar year. So 6 months, even that includes visa runs, right? So when you
Okay.
pop out to Singapore or to Vietnam and then you circle back, once you're still counting the days, the clock didn't stop running or it didn't reset. So once you cross that threshold in a given calendar year, technically you're a tax resident and you are
Okay.
exposed to taxes. But what happens is that in most jurisdictions, the immigration guys don't talk to the tax guys. So unless you are somehow you got everyone's attention by being too successful or too loud or whatever, they're not going to care. They're not going to check. Some jurisdictions do check, like Singapore does check. Their tax authority does talk to immigration.
Okay.
So, but jurisdictions like that aside, they don't check, but technically you do become tax resident by spending a lot of time there.
Okay, awesome. So let's jump into one of the questions we've got on the live chat. So it's from Martin Bruce. He is my friend actually, and he says, "Hello, I am an Austrian citizen with an Austrian tax residency, but I live as a digital nomad and hardly spend any time in Europe. I earn my income from US American companies as a contractor. I earn USD into a US bank account. I'd like to tax this properly, but I'm not sure how this works with foreign bank accounts and foreign currencies. Let me know what to do," basically.
Right. So again, just speaking generally about someone who's an independent contractor, but they're performing services to a US entity or a US client. A lot of people have US clients, but they're not resident in the US.
Okay.
Once they have no US exposure or what we call permanent establishment or no US nexus, technically they should not be exposed to US taxes.
Even though he has a
So
US bank account where the money's going in?
yeah,
Okay.
that's fine. The
Cool.
services, assuming the services are not being performed on US soil, he
Okay.
has no US agent, he has no US representative, he stays out of the US, he doesn't have a US LLC, blah blah blah, then technically it shouldn't be subject to US taxes. And if his client, assuming that he's an independent contractor, again, and not an employee, if he's an employee, that's something else. But assuming he's an independent contractor, if there's withholding, i.e., if his client is holding back money to pay the tax authorities, technically he should be able to get a refund. Then the question becomes, where does he become tax resident? I would say that unless he's spending more than 6 months in Indonesia or Philippines or wherever it is, he may be tax resident in Austria still.
Okay.
And therefore, he should check with his Austrian tax consultants to
Cool.
see whether he should be filing and paying taxes there, which on the face of it, it appears he should be.
Okay. That was a great question, Martin, and also a great answer, Darren. So thank you. So let's move on to another live question we've got here. It's from Sebastian Pera. He says, "What do you think about incorporating an LLC in the USA for a non-US citizen and non-resident with no business in the US? Is this a good practice for an online entrepreneur?"
There's no one answer. There's no one size that fits all. Everything is a function of your own facts and circumstances. So your business plan should drive where you incorporate it, right? Because you need to think where your suppliers, where your ultimate clients are going to be. More importantly, these days, where's your bank account going to be? And depending on basically what your business model is, that will drive where you incorporate. The US is easy because it's just such an easy jurisdiction. Like in a few hours, you have your Delaware LLC. But the ease of incorporation shouldn't really drive where you incorporate. It has to be a business decision that is driven by the facts of your situation. That'll be
Okay.
my answer.
Okay. Awesome. Michael Sarasi asked, "Do I pay taxes in my home country and the countries I'm visiting? If yes, how long do I need to stay in a country before I have to start paying their taxes too?" I think we've already covered this one, but maybe if you want to just briefly recap it.
Right. Yeah. Just to recap, the rules vary by jurisdiction. The default is 183, but there are variations of that. For example, the US has its own calculation. So what you need to do is wherever you're spending any time and wherever you're spending any time working, you'd probably want to reach out to a tax professional who has experience and qualifications in the jurisdictions in which you are exposed. So that would be where you're physically working and where you're earning money, which may be somewhere else. Just making sure that you're covering all your bases and you don't have any surprises later on.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, so Martin is back with round 2 to his question. If you become a tax resident in a country by staying in it for 180 plus days, do you stop being a tax resident in your home country? Can you be a tax resident in multiple countries at the same time? And how can you juggle this realistically?
Yes, that's a great question. And the answer is categorically yes. So for me personally, I'm tax resident in Singapore, the UK, and the US.
Okay.
So anyone can be tax resident in multiple jurisdictions. So once you cross that threshold, say by being in Bali or Chiang Mai or Cartagena or wherever it is, that doesn't negate your previous jurisdictions. It may, depending on your circumstances, may just add to it.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. I've got a question here from Naomi Paine. I rent a cottage as my home base and use one room in it exclusively for work. I also travel with my travel trailer. I work while on the road. Every trip includes meetings with people, attending conferences, and me teaching workshops. As an example, I'm going to Denver for the month of June. While I will be there, I'll be working about 70% of the time. Round trip mileage will be about 3,800 miles, and I have campground expenses. Lots of detail here. She wants to know, what can I write off? Part of my cottage as a home office, her travel trailer, all of her road trip expenses. Let's jump into that. This is detailed.
Yeah, so just again speaking generally, in the US, the IRS looks at two things, and they look at expenses that are ordinary and necessary to your line of business. Ordinary and necessary. If you understand, I mean, you understand your business model better than we would right now. So once your expenses are ordinary and necessary, keep your receipts. Keep your receipts. And then when you sit with your preferred tax advisor at the end of the year or quarterly, depending on how you do it, then they'll be able to sift through it and see what is and what isn't. But there are options as to whether to just deduct the absolute amount of in terms of expenses or do a mileage deduction. So
Okay.
again, you keep a mileage log as well.
Yeah.
So I arrived in Denver and this is how many miles, and then I moved to wherever and that was how many miles.
Yeah.
And you just keep a solid mileage log. So then you can compare whether deducting your absolute expenses makes you more tax efficient than doing the mileage calculation. So keep everything.
Cool. Luigi Florimo asked, let's say I have a business online in a banking account in Italy. I live in Canada. Where do I have to pay taxes? So actually, let me try and take a stab at this, Darren, and you tell me if what I say is on point, because I think we've covered this now a couple times. So basically, Luigi is going to be responsible for paying taxes in any country that he's considered a tax resident. So that's likely a place where he's spending more than 183 days of the year. Is that roughly accurate?
Correct, yeah. So if it is that he's triggered Canadian tax residency by being there more than the requisite number of days, then he should technically be declaring that to the Canadian tax authorities. And if he still has, if he has, I think he's from Italy, I think it was. So if he is severed, if he has gone to the tax authority in Italy and severed his tax residency as in terminated it, then he would have no longer any exposure there. But
Okay.
if he didn't, he may still have exposure there. So that needs to be resolved as well.
Okay. Awesome. Sean Smith says, thank you for doing this. Thank you for thanking us, Sean. His question is about the tax implications for a U.S. citizen working for a U.S.-based company on U.S. payroll but living abroad and working remotely. He knows about the FEIE but wants to know how the rules work for someone working for a U.S.-based company paid to a U.S.-based account or U.S. bank account. That's his question.
Okay, so it's essentially it's the same in that I think he may have answered this question. In terms of the foreign earned income exclusion, there are two ways of qualifying for it. One is the bona fide
So wait,
residence test, and
let's just quickly pause here because this topic of the foreign income exclusion is a pretty big one in the world of digital
yeah,
nomadism. So let's just quickly share with everyone what is it, the premise of it, just briefly, so everyone can be on the same
Sure.
page.
Okay, absolutely. So if you are US exposed, i.e., one of the four categories we mentioned earlier, you have a US passport, you were born in US soil, whether or not you have a passport or not, doesn't matter. You're born in US soil, you have a green card, or you spend a lot of time on US soil. So you are US exposed.
Okay.
And being US exposed, you're subject to tax on your worldwide income regardless of where you reside. So there are people who were American by virtue of being born to an American parent in Malaysia, just random example. They've never set foot in the US, but they're US citizens, subject to tax on their worldwide income. So you're subject to tax on your worldwide income. There are only two countries in the world that do it. The other one is Eritrea. And there's a break, a tax break or a tax benefit given to those who are not living in the US but working outside. And this is called the foreign earned income exclusion. And there's a housing deduction, but mainly the foreign earned income exclusion. What that means is that the first 100,000 US dollars, it moves with inflation, but let's just keep it simple, 100K. The first 100K is sheltered from US taxes. So you declare it, so a tax return still needs to be filed, but no taxes are due. So
Okay.
how do you qualify for this foreign earned income exclusion? You do so in one of two ways. The first way is called a bona fide residence test, and that's more of a subjective test, a test of intent. So if it is that you do have a job outside of the US and you pay taxes, they ask that question, do you pay taxes to jurisdiction outside of the US? You rent your home outside of the US. So you basically you're bona fide resident of somewhere else. Check. You get the first 100K tax free. The
Okay.
second way of qualifying it, it's less subjective and very objective. It's called the physical presence test. And basically, you spend no more than 1 month in the US and the other 11 months you spend outside of the US. And
Okay.
check the box, yep, you get your foreign income exclusion. So, circling back to the question posed, regardless of whether you work for a foreign employer or US employer, by virtue of staying outside of the US for the requisite period, you will qualify under the physical presence test, or by virtue of being a bona fide resident somewhere else, you would qualify as a bona fide residence test. So,
Okay.
yes.
Awesome. Um, a personal question I have about this topic that I've heard some confusion about is the 100K exclusion applicable to both state taxes and national taxes?
Right. So the foreign earned income exclusion is a classification and a rule under, I think it's Section 911 of the Internal Revenue Service Code. So it's a federal law. So it has nothing to do with the states. You know, you have 50 different
Okay.
states, 50 different rules. So whether or not you're exposed to state taxes, that's a function of whether you have any exposure at the state level. And you can be, so the easiest way, whether you're American or not, so coming back into the sphere of the non-Americans, those who sell stuff on Amazon or they're just selling stuff online, you may be subject to state taxes, but indirect taxes, the sales and use taxes, by virtue of selling stuff online to American residents, people who reside in the US. So that's something to giving you a heads up, and you need to consult with someone on that. If you're with Amazon or one of the bigger guys, they kind of tell you because they send you a report every year that says, hey, this is where you expose because we as Amazon, we have warehouses and that
Yeah.
constitutes nexus. And this is your level of exposure, deal with it.
Okay.
If you're not selling through someone like that, then you probably need to consult with someone and work it out on your own.
Sure.
For those who, so this is for the non-Americans as well as the Americans who are selling stuff online.
Okay.
For those who are US exposed under one of the four categories mentioned earlier, the question of whether you still need to deal with state taxes, it depends on which state. 50 different states, 50 different rules. One of the stickiest that we deal with is Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia. And for obvious reasons, there's so many government employees there with so many of the services. So that when they're deployed overseas, even though they spend the entire year outside, Virginia says, well, we think you're still a resident of Virginia unless you prove otherwise. So you need
Okay.
to take concrete steps to sever all ties with Virginia.
Okay.
An easier state to work with is California. California, they're not too picky, they're kind of laid back and they say, we just count your number of days. Once you spend less than a certain number of days in California, then we consider you non-resident and we'll only tax your California source income, like your rental properties or whatever. But
Sure.
other than that, you're free. So it really depends on the state and it depends on your situation.
Okay, awesome. So it sounds like then if you're an American freelancer or digital nomad who's traveling and you're out of the States for basically 11 plus months a year, to minimize your taxes maximally, it might make sense to move and change your residency to a state that has very low income tax and then also claim the foreign income exclusion. That would effectively mean you could pay almost zero income tax up to 100K. Is that accurate?
Yeah, definitely. So we would advise clients as part of like an offshoring strategy to,
Okay.
you register to vote, you get an address in one of the 8 states that doesn't have an income tax, say Florida, Nevada, Texas, whatever. And so that deals with it at the state level. And then you count your days or establish bona fide residence outside, and then you get the federal level sorted. So yeah, you're correct. Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Here's a question from Ali Kim. Hoping I can get some insight on this. If you become a non-resident for tax purposes and while abroad, you earn income from abroad, but you have your salary sent to your Canadian bank account, will that make you liable to pay Canadian taxes? I'm going to grab this one as well because I think we've answered it. So effectively, if you're still considered a resident in Canada and that money is coming in, then yes, or tax resident in Canada, then yes, you're going to be liable for Canadian taxes. If you're no longer considered a resident in Canada and not a tax resident, then you will not be having to pay those taxes. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Once you've properly severed tax residence for Canada, it shouldn't be taxed in Canada. And assuming it's not Canadian source income, assuming that the income is from a client somewhere outside and you did not, you have no, you're not working on Canadian soil, dipping in and out. So yeah, I agree with you.
Okay. Changing gears a little bit. One question I have, because I hear it being talked a lot about in these online communities of remote workers and whatnot, is this idea of flag theory. Is that something you can just briefly share with everyone, like what it is and what's the kind of benefit? Like, why are people talking about this?
Flag theory?
Yeah. So
sorry, no clue. What is that?
Okay, so
Yeah.
the flag theory, I don't know, maybe you have a different name for it. The flag theory is this idea of having multiple bank accounts and passports and basically nationalities around the world to kind of be more distributed as an individual with your kind of income and like opportunities and freedom. I don't know. Is there different? Have you heard of this in some other format?
I've never heard it referred to it before, but it's something that makes sense in the sense that depending on where you're doing business or what you're trying to do or the level of freedom that you want to achieve, etc., there are some passports that are more beneficial than others. So, for example, we have clients from Indonesia and the Philippines, and it's always like a lottery when they want to travel somewhere. They need to apply for a visa.
A lottery. Okay.
They're waiting for days,
Yeah.
whether it's going to happen or not. And then there's also the reality of, so that's discrimination at the border level. And then the discrimination at the bank level. When you land in a certain country and you go to their bank and you want to open a bank account, some companies, if your corporation is incorporated in some jurisdictions and your passport is from a certain jurisdiction, you probably would be received with less suspicion than if you came from an alternative jurisdiction. So I think it really depends on the individual and what they're trying to achieve. Then that drives where they want to establish residency. where they want to establish citizenship, and where they want to incorporate their business, and where they want to open their bank accounts. And it may not be as simple as Googling online and seeing the number of jurisdictions you can get into visa free,
Okay.
which tends to put like a European passport or US passport near the top. Because I know some people with US passports and they don't want to travel on it because of, certain political whatever, and they
Yeah.
would prefer something else. So again, it's driven by individuals rather
Okay.
than any absolute ranking.
Cool. Thank you. Rodrigo McKinley Comas asks, he's a U.S. citizen. He works as a freelancer as a consultant. I meet conditions to qualify for the foreign income exclusion, but I'm exposed to self-employment tax. I hear conflicting advice about
Mm.
whether I can shelter myself from this by creating a foreign-based company to employ himself. What's your view on that, Darren?
Yeah, that is a great question, and that is quite a common question for business owners and entrepreneurs.
Okay.
So when you work as an independent contractor, you would be hit by a self-employment tax of around 15%, and depending on how much you earn, that could be a big number. So
Okay.
the workaround with that and the legal way, of course, is, as he mentioned, to incorporate a foreign company or just incorporate a company. If you incorporate a company in a foreign jurisdiction, like in Singapore, Hong Kong, or Dubai or whatever, Mauritius, you get around the self-employment tax, but you may be hit by a new tax that's been enacted by President Trump's recent tax reform,
Okay.
which is the GILTI. So the GILTI, Global Intangible Low Tax, low income tax. So to answer your question, you need to sit with someone and they need to understand the mathematics behind your business. So
Okay.
basically, how much are you earning, where you earning it, and therefore, what is the right structure for you? It's not as simple as just incorporating something overseas, because then you're substituting one problem with another.
Okay.
And so, and yeah, and then if you do it in the US, you're gonna hit with a double tax. So you need to sit with someone, and they probably need to do like a spreadsheet with
Okay.
a goal seek function and figure out what's the best way to balance it out.
Okay. Rodrigo commented, great. So it sounds like you got some value from that. So thanks for letting us know, Rodrigo. Drew Wagner asks, if I set up an IBC in a non-corporate tax country as a U.S. citizen residing in a different foreign country, can the revenues that do not get distributed be deferred from U.S. tax until they are distributed? I don't know what he means, but you might.
Yeah, so I mean that again, that's everyone's dream, right? The ability to only pay tax when you get a distribution
Okay.
from your entity. It was possible up until like last year, but it's no longer possible. Well, it's no longer easily achievable. The reason being, as I mentioned to the previous question, if you have that IBC, if you have an international business company, which may be a low tax or zero tax, as a US person, you will still be subject to GILTI, the Global Intangible Low Tax Income Tax. It's a new tax that's been enacted. So basically, what it does is anti-deferral. So even though you did not take a profit distribution, it assumes a deemed distribution. So it
Okay.
says, I know you didn't take anything as dividends or bonus, but you are deemed to have done so anyway, and we want to see taxes on it.
Okay.
So that's the new IRS position. So there are ways around it. There are structures that naturally around it, but it would require some work. But it's
Okay.
possible, but it's not easy.
Okay. Awesome. I bet that's going to be helpful for him. Michael Sarasi asked, what software do you recommend using to manage your finances or taxes, and why? I think this is a good question, actually, because I have the same
Yeah.
one, and probably a lot of people who are watching might too.
Uh, I guess I'm old school, as you know,
Okay.
with the issues that I had in setting up this live stream. So I would advocate that you get a professional rather than software, because software relies on algorithms created by a human being, right? And a human being, by definition, is imperfect. And with the complexities of cross-border tax rules, I would even assert that I don't think that such a software exists. If it
Okay.
is that you're entirely within a border, so if it is you are 100% in the US, in Canada, in the UK, in Australia, then yes, you will get
Okay.
something. But once you're gonna cross geographies, no, it's
Okay.
not gonna work.
So maybe, so that sounds like your answer is talking about if you want to be like filing your own taxes and whatnot, but
Mhm,
maybe
mhm,
he might be referring to just like as an individual. Like I do have an accountant, and so I have to talk and
mhm,
communicate with them. Is there like any apps or anything that's helpful for like tracking my expenses or like the income I'm getting places, like the information I actually have to collect to share with the tax professional?
Ah, right. Yeah. Okay. I got you. I got you. So, I mean, there's like loads of them. And actually, at the recent talks that where I met you in Bali, there are guys working on apps right now. So there are small scale apps that are up and coming. But the two big ones in this space, at least in the Western world, including Australia and New Zealand, would probably be Intuit and Zero. So
Okay.
Intuit has QuickBooks,
Okay.
US company, and Zero. I think it's originally from New Zealand, but it's re-domiciled to the US. So they have great software, and there's an app as well. So basically, you just take pictures of receipts, and it makes the process of recording everything super simple. So then you pass that to your chosen professional, and they're able to run with it much easier.
Okay.
So but our clients mainly use Zero and QuickBooks.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Martin has a quick follow-up question, which is about the multiple tax residencies. Do I need to tax the same income in all residencies or every income only where I'm currently at?
Hmm. That's another good question. If your tax team doesn't know what it's doing, yeah, that's it's easy for something like that to happen where income is taxed multiple times. But in principle, your income should only be taxed once. There
Okay.
are some exceptions to that. One of the more popular exceptions is when someone still has state nexus. So, for example, someone from Virginia. So even though they're only paying tax once at the federal level between US and Indonesia, US or UK, Australia, whatever, they may be taxed twice at the state level. So it'll be taxed by Australia and then Virginia wants to tax it as well. So, but that all goes away with proper tax planning. So the key is proper tax planning.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Sean Smith asked, do you have any advice on finding a tax professional to work with for filing taxes specifically for remote workers? This is a great question.
So it depends on the jurisdictions in which you're exposed.
Okay.
So, so for example, if you're American in Bali, or Canadian in Bali, that's something that we could help with because we have, well, I don't know everything, but we have members of our team who are US qualified and Indonesia qualified and Canadian qualified. Whereas if it is that you were Brazilian in Chiang Mai, we can't help you. So we know the Thai side, but we don't know Brazilian tax. So it's basically about figuring out at some elementary level where you're tax exposed and ensuring your team is qualified and experienced in those jurisdictions.
Okay. That's a great answer.
Yeah.
Another question we have here is, and this is one that I asked you actually when I met you in person, is
Yeah.
for someone who's just a resident in one country, but they're just kind of traveling around as a digital nomad, at what rough, and this is not advice, this is just a conversation, at what rough income level should they start to be considering consulting basically with like a tax professional team to potentially consider having citizenship or residency or bank account and a tax structure set up in maybe different countries from their home country? Like obviously if you're,
Mm-hmm.
making, let's say 20,000 US a year, I imagine a
Mm-hmm.
lot of this stuff is just not going to make any sense. So maybe is there
Mm-hmm.
just like can you talk about this a little bit?
What's a magic number? Uh,
Yeah.
Personally, our team we don't get involved or we don't typically take on clients that are earning less than six figures
Okay.
because it's just simple. But there are people online who would.
Okay.
So as so I don't think there's a magic number. I think there is intent and ambition. So like we do have a client who I'm earning 5 figures now, but my business is scaling rapidly. And I need to lay the right foundation so that when I do hit 6 and 7 figures, I'm not gonna fall apart, right? So
Okay.
I'm not gonna get any unwanted surprises. So I would say if you are 5 figures, but your intent is to move forward to more than that, then it's probably worth consulting people. And if you're 6 and 7 figures, well, definitely, maybe too late, but better late than
Maybe too
never.
late.
Move
Okay,
quickly.
cool. Um, let's just see. I have a couple more questions here. One of the biggest concerns many digital nomads have is that by being in a country and doing work, even though it's completely online, they're violating their tourist visas and or now owe tax to that country. Is that true? So I think we've covered that for many countries, if you're staying in it for more than 183 days of the year, then it's likely that you may be considered a tax resident. And yes, you could actually need to pay some taxes. But the part of the question that we haven't answered yet is about the violation of your tourist visa.
Mm, yeah, so that's quite a common question, and that's quite a common problem. I think I shared that I spoke with an officer at the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta in Indonesia, and he says too much of his team's time is spent getting Americans out of a situation like that. So basically, some countries are more strict than others.
Okay.
So, for example, Singapore, where I am, if it is that you're just coming for a meeting or to do like one quick seminar, then Singapore is fine. Okay, well, come in as a tourist, it's not going to be a problem. You're going to be in, you're going to be out.
Okay.
Indonesia doesn't take that approach. Indonesia says, as a tourist, you just came in to have a good time. If you're attending any meetings, if it is that you're doing anything other than being a tourist, then you may be arrested, and you may get into a whole heap of trouble. And we gave the example of the photographer on the beach. I mean, taking a picture of your girlfriend, that's one thing, but when you have the big fancy camera and you have lighting and you have umbrellas, it's obviously a paid photo shoot, and it's happened on multiple occasions. People have been asked, well, show me your visa. If they could not, they've been detained. So this is not so much a tax situation, but an immigration perspective.
Yep.
You need to understand the rules of the country that you're trying to work in.
Yep.
And if it is that you're not truly location independent and you're going in there and you're going to make money as an entertainer, or as you're hosting some sort of seminar or conference or something like that, you may have to register and pay taxes.
Okay. Yeah, and
So you need to check the rules.
I think what you're saying, yeah, check the rules for sure. But probably
Yeah.
I would imagine for many countries or most countries that, yeah, you just technically, if you're working on a tourist visa, you're definitely opening yourself up to maybe some tax or legal troubles potentially.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
and for everyone watching, and I imagine you might agree with this sentiment, Darren, this is definitely something that I've had a lot of conversations about with people. And as a digital nomad, the challenge for us is that most of the countries that have these rules about working as a tourist don't really have a very practical or viable option for us to just fill out some paperwork or something online. And it's not even that people want to avoid taxes, it's just that there's no simple or timely method actually to be legally entering a country and maybe doing some emails or a little bit of work. So I'm sure though, it's 2019, times are changing, although the governments are always slow. So hopefully it's there. Some of them are catching up. I know Thailand has recently introduced a visa for digital nomads, but it's only for people earning 6 figures or more, which many digital nomads are not yet. So, there's some things changing, but hopefully some more things coming faster. So on that topic, I guess, so anyone else who is watching live, let us know if you have any questions you want Darren to tackle. I want to ask you, what kind of trends in the world of remote work and digital nomadism, taxes, do you kind of see moving forward? Like, where are we at right now, and like, what do you see as a professional kind of shifting in the next decade or so?
Hmm. Well, I think it's the sophistication and aggression on the part of tax authorities.
Okay.
So, and I guess, I'm biased, right? So to a guy with a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
But that's the space that I play in. So, whereas many countries were turning a blind eye to it, that's no longer the case. Not just at the OECD level, so the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So basically, the wealthy countries, not just them, but also the developing economies as well. So you mentioned Thailand, and Indonesia has been making pushes to be more vigilant and to be more aggressive on tax collection. And yeah, I think that's it really. The days of hiding or flying under the radar, they're definitely over.
Okay.
So I know that things aren't always easily available online, especially in countries that don't speak a Western language, they don't speak English. It's kind of hard to find, but that's where the importance of getting the right team around you. So as a digital nomad, I think the group that you have is fantastic because you need to be part of an ecosystem,
Okay.
an ecosystem where you can tap into the right answers to the questions that you have, and be able to know what the right questions are. So basically, it's become more important than ever to have the right team around you to stay out of trouble.
Awesome. Thank you for
Mhm,
mentioning my group. For anyone who's watching who's
mhm,
not already in it, Darren is referring to the Digital Nomads Forum, which is a free Facebook community. We've got like over 9,000 people now. Darren's in there. And I'm sure if you're posting your questions about tax stuff that he might be around and catch it. Or if he's not, we've got some other people who might be able to give you some experience-based advice. Awesome. So Naomi Paine asked if there's any place to find a list of all the places that you could get in trouble easily. I don't think there is, but you can correct me if I'm wrong.
mhm. I gosh, I think most countries right now, if you break in a law, whether intentionally or not, chances are that someone's going to call you out on that. And well, I'm based in Singapore. I travel around the region, but I'm in Singapore 1 week every month. So uh, my typical month is 1 week in Singapore, 1 week in Indonesia. These days, a week in Hong Kong, and my fourth week is split between the Philippines and Malaysia. And Hong Kong and Singapore have become, all jurisdictions have become really, really strict, and the politics has evolved. I mean, the headlines are grabbed by Brexit and economic nationalism in the US, but it's the same in the recent election in Indonesia and the election that put President Duterte in power in the Philippines. So it's something that's everywhere. Everyone is being more nationalistic. Everyone is becoming more conscious of foreigners and their roles in their economies, and they want to make sure that foreigners, more so than before, are following all the rules and paying their fair share. So I wouldn't call any one country out. I think it's a global movement right now.
Okay, cool. Any more questions from you guys watching live? I have a question for you, Darren. So you sound like to me a pretty hardcore digital nomad with such an aggressive travel schedule. So I'm just curious, how long have you been kind of traveling and working remotely, and maybe what's been like the one biggest favorite benefit you've gotten out of this lifestyle, and the biggest trade back for people who are maybe watching who aren't digital nomads yet?
Yeah, I guess it's helpful that I practice what I preach, right? My background is I was born in London,
Okay.
and my parents are from Trinidad and the Caribbean. My parents split up. My dad moved to Florida, and my mom moved back to Trinidad. So my life has been spent as a triangle between the US, the Southern Caribbean, and the UK up until just shy of 6 years ago. So about 5.5 years ago, I moved to Singapore, and then I joined the team that I'm now a part of. So our firm has offices in 11 countries. So as far north as Tajikistan and Beijing, and all the way down to Bali. There's an office in Bali. So I work with each office with private client issues, which would include digital nomads. I think I get what a lot of people enjoy with the lifestyle, which is freedom. Uh,
You.
and it opens your mind as well, because at first I thought, well, everything is in the West, there's nothing else anywhere else in the world, so why check it out? But now it's opened my mind to a whole, different cultures, different business practices, and to be honest, different business opportunities. So I think what I get out of it is a sense of freedom and a chance to open my own mind and to learn, continuously learn. But the downside of it is it's kind of like having a really fancy car. It requires a lot of maintenance. So when you do operate internationally, it's a privilege, but it's also a responsibility. And just like with your car, you
Absolutely.
take it in every month or every few months and you get it serviced. You need to constantly update your structure as well. And I do it for myself and my clients. Check it out. The rules change. The rules changed in the US a couple of years ago. People had to frantically redo their structures. There's an amnesty going on right now in Malaysia. There'll soon be one going on in the Philippines, a tax amnesty. So depending on if you had a structure running through those jurisdictions, you may have to just take a second look at it to make sure it still works. So
Yeah.
it's constant maintenance is the downside, but I think the pros outweigh the cons.
Absolutely. Yeah, great answer. Thank you for sharing your story. It's always
Hmm.
interesting to hear how diverse the lifestyles are of the people who choose to be remote workers and digital nomads. I
Hmm.
definitely agree with you personally. Like my favorite uh, benefit of this lifestyle is definitely it's the freedom. It's having the choice to
Hmm.
basically live where I feel supported and then work on projects that I want to, that I'm passionate about and care about. So
Hmm.
Naomi Payne has another question. I think we'll let this be our last question and then we'll wrap it up. So she wants to expand on what she was mentioning before. She has a daughter who is a traveling student and does blogging. She has been to 15 countries in the last 6 months and wants to add affiliate marketing to her website. If she's shooting pictures for her blog, is that illegal? So maybe I'll say something here and let me know if you agree, Darren. So we've covered basically in this call that technically if she's doing work like income earning, I think that could be considered work in these countries that she's traveling to, then on a tourist visa, then that technically could open her up technically and legally to some legal troubles. Um, Sounds like she's traveling very quickly through the places though, so she's not going to
Hmm.
really probably owe any taxes in these countries going to. As a digital nomad running this community of 9,000 people and meeting like thousands of these people around the world, I can tell you from experience that most of them, 90%, are in countries on tourist visas and doing work, which is technically illegal, and they're not getting caught. But not getting caught is not the same as being legal. And as Jared has shared in this video, countries are kind of starting to get more strict. And so the advice I think I would offer to your daughter, Naomi, is just to be aware of what's happening, and it doesn't mean be afraid and don't do anything. It just means be mindful of how you're traveling through these countries and do your best to be legal and honest where you can. But I don't know, Darren, does that all kind of
Hmm.
resonate?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Just be careful. And from the immigration standpoint, which we're not covering, that you are or she is respectful of the immigration rules. And then some countries are more politically sensitive than others, depending on the nature of the blog. If the blog appears to be critical of that country, that could open a can of worms. But from a tax perspective,
Hey, Darren.
yeah,
We're just getting some comments here that there was a lot of background noise, so I might just backtrack the question here.
sure.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, you weren't hearing me. Okay. So
I was hearing you, but the commenters or the
right.
watchers are not. So let's just restate the question quickly.
Oh.
So Naomi is talking about her daughter traveling to like 15 countries in the last 6 months, and she's doing some photography that she's going to use on her blog for affiliate marketing, which it sounds like potentially she could be earning some money from. So basically all I was sharing was that based on the information we've learned in this talk today, legally, if you're on a tourist visa doing things that might be earning you income, that's considered work. You could be legally exposed and could maybe get in trouble. She's probably not tax exposed because she's traveling through these places quite quickly. My perspective as someone who's connected with thousands of these people all around the world is that the 90% plus are doing it technically illegally, and most of them are not getting in and into any trouble. But as you mentioned, basically times are changing, certain countries are getting stricter. We need to be aware of what is legal and just be mindful as we're traveling and potentially working in countries, doing our best to stay legal and also not maybe live in a fear mindset though. And I don't know. I don't want to give any advice, but mostly 90% plus people, they're doing what your daughter has described as doing, and it's not a big deal yet, but anyways.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think you said it all.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I think we'll just quickly wrap it up then. Thank you so much, Darren, for coming and answering people's questions. If people want to be connecting with you for advice about tax advice, if they're a digital nomad, remote worker, then I think the best place to find you is at htj.tax, the website.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Correct. Or I can put in my personal email address, which is, there you go.
Cool.
So, yeah, they can email me directly, or they can have a look at the website, or you can find me on Facebook as well.
Awesome. So Darren has graciously, you might regret this one day, Darren, has put his email in the comment of this video. Darren and myself are both hanging out in the Digital Nomads Forum Facebook group, and it's free to join if you're not already in there. And we encourage you guys, whatever digital nomad, remote work, tax questions or otherwise, post them in there. I really work hard to create a supportive community that's not about people promoting their crap and actually about people helping each other live this lifestyle of freedom. So thank you again, Darren. My name is Robert Birds. From you, Darren.
No, that's it. Thanks for your time, and thanks for those who either staying up late or got up early to log in. And let me know if you have questions going forward. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to end the live stream now, guys. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks again, Darren.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.